Welcome to Photosynthesis Part 1. In previous videos, we've talked about almost exclusively animals, or basically other things other than plants, that are doing cell respiration, where they're getting food, and they take that food and they convert it into the forms of energy that they need to do their everyday tasks. And we now know that this requires a molecule called ATP, it's the energy currency of the cells, and that these chemical reactions like glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain are part of an overall process called cell respiration. And we're now very well educated on cell respiration. But photosynthesis is a little bit different. Plants not only can do cell respiration, but they can do photosynthesis, which is actually creating the food that they need to do the cell respiration with in the first place. That's something that animals and other things like funguses can't do. So let's talk a little bit more about photosynthesis. So here's our plant. And our plant can't go out and get its own food. It is not a carnivore, it is not an animal, but it needs food, but it just so happens that it can make its own food. But you might be thinking, well, what about carnivorous plants? Don't they go get food? Don't they eat food just like an animal does? Well, sort of. But it turns out that these carnivorous plants here, like you can see the sundew plant and the Venus flytrap, while they are technically eating animals, and in this case, this Venus flytrap has actually caught a vertebrate animal, a frog, and it will digest that frog. The plants are looking mostly for nitrogen as a nutrient from the organisms. They're not actually looking for carbohydrates or, in other words, glucose from these organisms. So they're just looking for nitrogen. So the fact that a carnivorous plant actually eats something is correct. But notice what color the carnivorous plant is. It's green, and green plants do photosynthesis. So let's talk strictly about our little pepper plant here. This pepper plant needs to do photosynthesis, and here is our definition that we're going to be working off of for the rest of the unit. Photosynthesis is the cellular process of producing sugar and oxygen from carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. Some scientists have called this chemical reaction the most important chemical reaction on Earth. In other words, if plants didn't do this, then animals and other organisms couldn't eat the plants and couldn't get the nutrients from the plants, and there would be no higher organisms. There would be no things like animals, and there certainly wouldn't be humans. So if there were no plants doing this, all ecosystems would fall apart. Biology as we know it wouldn't exist. So again, scientists believe that this set of chemical reactions is the single most important set of chemical reactions on Earth. And this slide is from our previous tutorial video, The Flow of Energy Part 3, where we were talking mostly about cell respiration. And so there's your overall cell respiration equation up at the top, and then in green there you can see your photosynthesis reaction, which is solar energy or sunlight combining with carbon dioxide and water, giving off oxygen and glucose. And that, of course, is what plants do. So when we say plants make their own food, what we mean is they're actually just making glucose. So let's look at this from a more detailed point of view here. I want to highlight some things in our definition. First, this is a cellular process. This is going on inside the cells of plants. And in our next tutorial video, we're going to get into more detail as to how exactly this happens inside the cells, but we'll save that for the next video. The next thing is this concept of sugar. Again, we say plants make their own food, but what we really mean is that they make glucose. That's all they really need. They just need that carbohydrate in order to do cell respiration, which means their cells can do what they need to do. The other thing here is oxygen is produced from this chemical reaction. So the atmosphere on Earth is filled with oxygen, and it's filled with oxygen because there's lots of plants on Earth producing oxygen. It just so happens that animals and other organisms that need oxygen have that oxygen because plants are making it. The next thing here are the things that are required for photosynthesis. You need, of course, sunlight. We know that. We need water, which is in abundance in most places where you will find a plant. And, of course, carbon dioxide. And we'll talk more about that gas as we go along in our talk about photosynthesis. So here's our overall equation again, solar energy plus carbon dioxide plus water giving us oxygen and glucose. And here's our little diorama set up here. We have our flowering plants, we have our sunlight, and we have, of course, our rain. So the rain falls into the soil, the water gets into the soil, and the soil becomes saturated with that water, and the plant roots absorb that water. That's something that we know from a long time ago, so we're not really going to pay close attention to that. Of course, the sunlight is coming from the sun, and the sun hits the leaves of the plants, and the plant is green. That allows it to do photosynthesis. We'll talk more about that green pigment later. And of course, carbon dioxide is just in the air, and that's also getting absorbed by the plant. But the roots aren't necessarily doing it. This is the job of the leaf again. So the leaves are absorbing not only sunlight, but also carbon dioxide. And for the remainder of the video, I really want to focus on the plant leaves. The plant leaves are organs that are specifically designed to do photosynthesis and basically nothing else. So here's our leaf, the wondrous leaf. I love this up-close photo because it shows the veins of the leaf, and I want to talk about those briefly. So the H2O, or the water coming from the roots and going up the stems, makes its way into the leaves through the veins, and then in the veins of the leaf, each individual smaller vein carries the water to the other parts of the leaf that you can see there. So if you look closely at the leaf, you'll see all kinds of smaller veins just branching off and then branching off again and becoming smaller and smaller, to the point where an individual vein would actually be delivering water to an individual set of cells. So that's what the veins of the leaf are for. They're for carrying water. I love these photographs here because these are really up-close photographs of the veins of the leaf, and I really like this orange and black photo that you can see here in our video because it shows the network of the veins and the fact that they can carry water to basically every square inch of that leaf. And if we take this photograph here and we look at it slightly differently, so this is the surface of the leaf. It's been photographed in a special manner so that it doesn't look green, really. But if we look at it a little bit differently under a slightly different microscope, you can actually see the surface of the leaf. You're actually looking at the surface of the underside of a leaf here, and you can see that right here, if you can follow my cursor, this is a vein, and it's branching off, going off to the right-hand side here, and this one's branching off up at the top, going off to the left-hand side, so carrying water to all of these cells that I'm highlighting right now. Now notice there's basically two different types of cells. There's these cells that look like little jigsaw puzzle pieces. Those are the epidermis cells of the leaf. They're basically just the outer covering of the leaf. But then there's these cells that look like donuts, and there are actually two cells that make up this donut. And those are guard cells. We'll talk about those a little bit later. But what you're seeing here, the guard cells make up these little holes in the epidermis. And we'll talk about really what those are for in just a minute. Here's a closer look at that. Here are the epidermal cells just kind of hanging out and covering the plant, but then you have these guard cells that are creating these pores in the underside of the leaf. Here's sort of another depiction of these guard cells. Notice there's two of them, one here, and they can open and close. And the whole is what we call a stomate, and if we have several of them, we call them stomata. So that's the next vocabulary word that I want you to learn here, which is the leaf pores. They're called stomata. Here's some more information on the stomata. They're made by two guard cells, and when the guard cells swell with water, they sort of take on this crescent shape, and they make a hole, literally, in the bottom of the leaf. And that's where the stoma will open. Again, that's the name of the hole, the pore that is created in the bottom of the leaf. And gases can go in and out. A little bit of water vapor, atmospheric gases can go in and out, so oxygen, carbon dioxide, that kind of thing. And when the guard cells shrink, or when they release some water and become a little bit more flimsy, they sort of collapse on each other and that hole closes. So you can see the individual cells here with their cell parts. And again, when the guard cells swell with water,